So good evening. I want to thank you guys for coming. We have Donnie Souders, Councilman Donnie Souders from Smithsburg, and Councilman Kristin Aleshire from Hagerstown, and who is also the town manager of Meyersville. So you may have to do twice the amount of work this evening.
Like it.
Yeah. So what we want to talk about tonight is just kind of get your thoughts. We haven't really, we do a number of different topics. Our core values are ethics, education, the economy, and we also talk about diversity. That's kind of an important value that we go with as well. So we're going to basically talk about most of those things tonight, but we wanted to talk about, this is the first panel we've had on local municipalities. So we want to get your thoughts from each one of your foxholes and also discuss really interactions with the county commission and things like that. So we'll get into that in a second, but do you guys want to introduce yourselves? And
yeah, I'll go first. Donnie Souders, Smithsburg Town Council. I've been on the council for 11 years. I've served as vice president of the council, I believe 8 of those 11 years. We have an election coming up in June. I do not intend to run for re-election. It's been a pretty fun ride, but I was telling Scott before we came in, I think that national polarization and the angst against elected officials is starting to creep its way into local government elections. And as I told people before, if they want to give an opportunity to have their envision of what they want the town to look like, then put your name on a ballot and serve your community. So, like I said, I don't plan on running again. My time here has been great. I tell this story all the time because Kristin and I actually went to school together. You're what, 2 years behind me? I think, yeah, 2 years behind me. And I forget what the context of the conversation was. It might have been when he was on county commission or in one of my sales jobs and trying to solicit something at the town of Myersville. But he always said that part of the reason why he served, and please correct me if I say this wrong, that was trying to create a footprint for the next group that comes in behind you. And I've tried to use that principle in my time and tenure because, you're not going to get rich doing this. There's no real power in this. It's really about trying to leave something behind that when my son or his family later on comes through, even if it's something small in the park, adding, a piece of playground equipment, we're trying to make our communities better. And it takes, we were talking a little bit ago about basketball refereeing and things like that, and I'd like to tie that into when we talk about diversity. But part of doing that and doing this is trying to give back to something else. So we'll see what happens in June, but no, I appreciate you guys being here in Smithsburg. Please enjoy what you can in the town. I know we had comments and talked a little bit about our library a few moments ago. It's a great addition to our community. We as the town are working, Mayor Meyers, when she was here, did a lot to improve that park, and that she fought very hard to get the library where it is. And this council and Mayor Kesselring want to continue that tradition of improving the parks and making Smithsburg a destination that people want to come visit. So I welcome you and thank you for coming into our community.
Good evening. I'm Kristin Aleshire. I'm a council member for the city of Hagerstown. I ran for council when I was 25.
I thought you were 25 now.
We'll go with that.
I was the youngest elected official of the city of Hagerstown in its history. And after a term and a half, I ran for county commissioner, and I became the youngest elected county commissioner in Washington County's history. And I'm coincidentally the last Democrat to get elected as county commissioner in Washington County.
I feel your pain.
And speaking to the issue of the volatile state between the parties, while I was elected as a registered Democrat in the last city election, about 2 weeks after election, I filed as independent. I just felt that the last presidential process was a bit more, frankly, between that polarization of two parties that are supposed to be just simply doing the good work of people. They just wasn't happening, and I didn't want to be, associated, frankly, with either. I only served one term as county commissioner. I was not invited to return. to that position, and frankly, that was one of the best things that ever happened. You know, as a county commissioner, I averaged about 25 night meetings a month. I had, my wife and I just had our second little one about that time. We now have 5, and so, you know, there isn't a lot of time to devote to that large sort of jurisdictional nature of a county, because it is so drastically different from Hancock to Sharpsburg to Smithsburg. It just is, and you know, everyone that you go to as a county commissioner sort of thinks that the other town's your best friend, and you know, you're only there to pander to them. And that, and what I did over the 4 years as a county commissioner is, there are 8 municipalities besides the city of Hagerstown in Washington County, and so I attended a council member, a mayor and council meeting of 2 of the towns every month for 4 years straight, just trying to sort of build some of that relationship. And as you probably know now, the Hagerstown city election is nonpartisan, which is, I think, something, frankly, some of the local Republican Party fought to have happen under the guise or notion that it would increase the number of Republicans to get elected. And I don't think that that panned out as planned, you know, and now you come full circle to this current election, and you're seeing that creep of partisan participation in that nonpartisan process already underway, and we're not even, you know, in the heat of primary, if you will. And it's unfortunate because you simply, at this level, you just want to be a citizen that wakes up and goes to sleep every day and look at your kids and say, yeah, you know, I'm leaving it better than I found it. And getting to Donnie's point about this moniker that I have, it's pretty simple. When I was 25 and ran for office and looked 16, I remember so many people would ask me why you want to do this, and I said, quite frankly, most of my friends want to leave Hagerstown. They just did. I think some of them, you know, as they age out, still do. And I said, I want to be in Hagerstown. You know, I believe that it can be a good place. I believe that, you know, it's not as bad as people make it sound. And I was, you know, 25 then, and I said, but I don't want to wake up 20 years from now, which now is 20 years from now, and look back and say, I didn't do anything to fix it. So when you find that place you want to be, I think you should vest yourself in making it what you want it to be.
Thanks. Okay, so you mentioned that Smithsburg, the election, because this is an admin note, Smithsburg election is June, correct?
Correct. It's the first Monday in June.
And that's for mayor and town council? Correct?
No, so we split our seats up. This is 3 council positions.
Okay.
Mayor Kesselring and councilperson Hetherington and Weaver were elected 2 years ago. So this is for the 3 council positions. And we also are nonpartisan, of course.
Right.
And I'm still a registered Democrat, and I'm one of the very few that's in the county that is actually in an elected position. So yes, ours filing deadline is the first Monday in April, and then there's a short period of time, and then we'll have the election. Like I said, I'm sorry, it's in May, and then the new council takes over in June.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was, because I had May and you said June. I was like, man,
Yeah,
maybe I'm wrong.
I'm counting. No, I'm counting down the days.
That's good. That's what I was listening. Okay, so then Hagerstown is also, let's see if my note on Hagerstown is correct. Hagerstown's November 3rd, correct?
It is in line with the presidential.
It's the presidential.
That's correct.
And there are 5 city council positions, yes, in Hagerstown, and all 5 are open this election, correct?
Correct, as well as the mayor's position.
And so we know that there'll be a mayor and at least 1 new council person.
Actually,
No,
at
2,
least 2, because Emily
returned.
is running for
That's right.
the mayor's position, and Councilmember Metzner is not running.
And it looks like there are 13 candidates for those 5 positions, so.
Yeah, they'll whittle it down to 10 after the primary, and then, you know, have 10 to select from at the general election. There are 3 current individuals running for mayor. They'll whittle that down to 2 at the primary, so there'll be 10 individuals to select from for council, 2 individuals to select from for mayor, and it will not have party affiliation associated with that selection.
So Donnie had mentioned, and you sort of teased the diversity thing, so I think that's probably a good transition, especially coming out of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee meeting. So we live, obviously, as everybody knows, we live in a very rural community for the most part. Washington County is a rural community. Within that, Smithsburg is a fairly rural town. Hagerstown's a bit more urban, but still, it's by every other measure, it's not Annapolis or Baltimore or anything like that. So it's still sort of a hometown feel, but the largest in the county. And you each have, as members of those commissions, you each have unique perspectives. So what I'd like to talk about is, you have this community of Washington County, which is more diverse now than it was when I was a kid. I'm 48, so it's more diverse now based on languages spoken and ethnic backgrounds, but it's still very much a white community in a lot of ways. Having said that, so the population's more diverse than it was, but most of our elected officials are still, for the most part, it's white males. And we do have some white females, but minorities aren't really represented as well, and women aren't represented as much as probably needs to be. So could you guys talk about diversity within your community, how it's changing, what you're trying to do to make it more diverse? What, do you feel like you're representing your folks? Do you feel like, are there programs in place or those types of things?
I'll go first because it'll be a little, Smithsburg has less than 5%, a mix of brown and black in our community. We're in the midst, we just did it somehow became a very controversial economic development study that the council voted on 2 years ago, and we've got that data back, and we're starting to work on, and actually at our work session on Thursday, we're going to get a report on some of the stuff that we're starting to implement and work on. But in that study, it did show that, our diversity population is very minuscule in Smithsburg. You mentioned it, we're in a rural county, we're in a rural town in a rural county. In the boom of the orchard market, this community was different. We had a lot of Hispanics that would come in and work in the spring and summer and fall. They still do, and part of our economic study is to try to capture the heritage of Smithsburg, which is the apple orchards, and how we can capture some of the workers and things to come in and spend money and dollars in town, as opposed to, a lot of people don't understand that the Martins and the shopping centers out that way are not a part of Smithsburg. They're county. So we see no revenue, even though we're responsible for some of the infrastructure issues and concerns there. We work with the county on those things. No revenue really comes directly back into our community. So, we are trying to figure out ways to capture those dollar rings. Unfortunately, our local market just shut down probably in the last 2 or 3 months. That family had struggled to try to capture some of that back. And a big part of theirs is the employees that are at Halley Farms, and even their diversity has changed over the years as far as whom and who works for them and who shops at some of our local places. So, I was having a conversation before the panel started that our economy has struggled, and I'm not sure, part of your question was, what are we doing to kind of capture that? I'm not sure if you can put a sign up, at Smithsburg that says, we want you to come in. We want you to come in. We do. It's a matter of, they're going to have to make the choice where they want to live. I'll argue with anyone that Smithsburg has the best school system in Washington County. And that was a selling point when I moved here from Hagerstown, was that my family, for my stepdaughter, wanted to be in a good school. A lot has changed in this community with the closure of Fort Ritchie. At one point in time when Fort Ritchie was here, our diversity rate was closer to double digit because you had an influx of a lot of military families coming in and out of this area. So once BRAC went through and made the change and recommendation to close Fort Ritchie, and that finally went down, we haven't had any real development there as far as housing or anything to that effect. We have experienced a housing deficit since 2004. We haven't had any real growth. We've got some annexation that we're working on here up on the Cloverly LLC property that in the next few years will come to fruition, and we'll see some sort of diversity as far as workers. I just don't know if that diversity is going to translate over into becoming residents and citizens of Smithsburg. So it is a struggle. I think communities flourish when there is diversity and there's inclusion of different cultures and things like that. I have a 14-year-old son. So one of the things that I try to impress upon my son is not only tolerance, but understanding and acceptance of why people are different, and not to judge, but to try to understand and ask questions to be informed as to why there are those differences. And again, we both have talked about the polarization, as we see from the national level. Unfortunately, there are a lot of ignorant connotations, a lot of ignorant thoughts, and in majority white areas, that is a struggle. And every community in Washington County, I'm sure Kristin can say the same thing, struggles with that. And as a government, we try to facilitate it as best we can. You try to, like I said, we're trying to work on our economic development opportunities in town. We would love to have more minority owners of these opportunities. And we're working to try to create programs and foster and incubate those systems. But a lot of it is we've got to it's almost like the Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. So Smithsburg right now is we're trying to build it so they come mentality. We've been a sleepy town for a while. We are a commuter town where a lot of people live and just drive through to get to 70 and go to work. But it's a struggle. And as I mentioned before, I'm the head of the Basketball Officials Association for Washington County. And I actively go out and try to recruit more minority men and women officials to come here, because we don't have, even in that genre, we don't have a lot of brown and black folks or women get involved in sports and things like that in this area.
Yeah, and so from a CAP perspective, one of the things that we try to do when it comes to diversity is, we try to identify, we try to get diverse candidates to run for office and then encourage them to, we encourage diversity in office. Your situation and Smithsburg's situation and Hagerstown's are somewhat different because, like you just said, if you don't have a lot of as many diverse folks living there, it's harder, obviously, you don't have a candidate pool to pull from. But having said that, you talked about Fort Ritchie. We know the Cascade deal is it's kind of been in and out. How would a fairly vibrant Cascade change, not only from an economic standpoint, but, bringing in different folks and things? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think it depends on what exactly is developed. If we have an opportunity where it brings in a different collection of different individuals, different types of individuals, as I stated earlier, I think the more diversity, the more eclectic your community is, the better off you are.
Right.
But again, you're right. It's been 20 some years that we've had this roller coaster of what's going to happen up there. So we've never planned on, it's in the back of our mind that, if one day that gets developed, how that's going to affect our infrastructure and things here. And we have that in the back of our mind, but our long-term plan isn't based on what happens at Cascade.
Okay.
And again, we see a small influx because the vast majority, when it's funny, I was talking earlier, a lot of the people that say they're from Smithsburg aren't from Smithsburg proper.
Right.
We've got, for the size of the school, we've got a nice diversity in our school system, but a majority of those kids, their families don't live in the town.
Right.
But we still try to provide those services. We do a lot of community activities, things that the government sponsors through one of our town committees. We see an influx of a lot of diversity and a lot of attendance from different kids from different backgrounds, and that's great. That's why we do this. This is the footprint that we're trying to leave behind. And even on the sports side of things, to try to recruit and to get retention of good officials or just coaches to be involved in things like that. I agree with you. I went to South High. South Hagerstown is a very diverse school. There's a much bigger mix. And then when you come here to a small rural town in Washington County, and you see that there's a minuscule, number of that, you can become complacent in the way that you think, in the way that you look at things. And that's another thing that I think long-term, not just at a Hagerstown level or Smithsburg or Washington County, but a larger swath needs to look at and try to understand that things are changing. Demographics are changing. The country as a whole is changing.
Right.
And like I said, I teach my son how to embrace it and how to become, more receptive to it than to, say, because I grew up, Mickey Meyers, if she was still the mayor, would tell you that she was one of the first female mayors in the state of Maryland, and was involved in town politics for nearly 30 years. And I've served with female candidates. We haven't had African American or Hispanics run for office here. I also served on the Democratic Central Committee, and that was one of the pillars that when I was there for 3 years serving as the treasurer, we actively tried to recruit minority and at that time, before this big wave in 2016, 2018 of female candidates to run, we actively pursued and tried to get more diversity on tickets and balance things out. But I also remember when Linda Irvin Craig was on the county commission, and we had women in predominant positions. We see it in the school board. We have a lot of females that get elected to the school board. Right. It just has not been able to translate over to county commission or a lot of the municipalities.
Thanks. So Hagerstown, a little bit different of a scenario, similar but different.
Well, when I was a county commissioner back in 2010, towards the end of the term, there was a gentleman who came up from Montgomery County and did a speech for the Tea Party over near the police barracks or whatever that hotel is. And for about 2 hours, talked to a attending audience, maybe 200 people, about the issues that he was experiencing associated with illegal immigration population in Montgomery County. And after that meeting, I went up to the gentleman and I said, I appreciate that you may have those issues in your community, but you touched on those issues associated with impacts of costs to our Washington County Sheriff's Office. And I said, I find it odd that we have hundreds of people engaged in that type of conversation when I show you a stat that says in 2009, we had 990 incarcerated individuals that took the GED test and only 90 passed. But in that same year, the Washington County Sheriff's Office only had 3 individuals that were identified as being in the country illegally. I understand and appreciate that's an issue in your community, but in this community, here are the issues that I face. Here are the issues as an elected official that I am intent upon addressing and correcting. I'm not asking whether that individual that took that GED is black or white or Hispanic or old or young or male or female. I just need to figure out how we can get more than 10% of the people that cost us $60-some thousand to proceed through a GED program while incarcerated, actually passing the GED at a higher percentage rate. And so, I look at these issues, and I'll take Hagerstown, and I wanted to use that analysis to spin off to this response. In the city of Hagerstown, I would say when it comes to issues of inclusion and diversity and struggles of that nature, I don't approach that subject in a manner of classification of an individual. For me, the larger issues are the fact that the percent of people living at or below the poverty level is 18% in some areas, and it's 2% in this county outside of the city. The fact that we have 16% senior citizens living in the city and only 8% outside of the city in this county. That we have thousands, I think it's 5,300. We have 5,300 of our 10,000 rental units in the city that are in some form of rent subsidy, more than 50%. And so then that resonates to our ability to establish neighborhood stability,
right,
which then in effect establishes neighborhood opportunity, which then affects the opportunity that exists within the city schools, and trying to make that connectivity between, you know, what classification a person is way out here, because I'm attempting to figure out how to adequately address the fact that 80 cents of every tax dollar that I'm spending goes to police and fire. And the fact that we have a growing list, we're at more than 5,000 individuals on a waiting list for housing that continues to decline in its accessible base. You know, those are the things that you know, that I grapple with. It would be one thing if I could sit back and say, you know what, I need more people of color. I need more individuals to be female to run for mayor and council. But for me, for the 20 years that I've been doing it, and I've served under 4 different mayors, you know, and I've served with 20 different council people at this point, I've never ever sat down and tried to say, hey, you know, is this council going to be good because it's got a majority of women, or is this council going to be, you know, good because, you know, because it has, you know, one of each type of person that we can work with? I try and say, hey, are they going to be good because they can focus on the issues that we've got to deal with and address? And so, you know, I don't know that even in a community that is arguably more diverse in Hagerstown than it is in a town of Smithsburg, that there's any, you know, impending criteria that I can say, hey, you know, voters of the community, you know, hey, citizens of the community, you got to run for office and you got to vote for these people running for office. I would hesitate to want the criteria of an individual to be, you know, their age or their sex or their sexual orientation or the color of their skin. I just want to know that individuals are going to look at the 10 or 12 issues that we have that are major issues and engage them in some knowledgeable and dedicated platform and address them in a definitive manner that they need to be.
So let me ask you this, and then it'll be just a follow-up, and then it's kind of a two-part for both of you then. So you mentioned stabilizing neighborhoods. So how do you then, well, I mean, Hagerstown's got, you know, north, south, east, west ends, and they're sort of diverse in their populations in their own way. At least it always seems that way. How do you stabilize those neighborhoods? And then the second part, and this is for both of you, you said the 10 or 12 things for each of those communities and countywide. I mean, what do you guys see that it doesn't have to be 10 to 12, but what are the areas of focus that you guys as city councils are focused on to improve in your counties?
You want to go first?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, you know, the basic tenets are a stable tax base, you know, an educated population, and economic opportunity, and a safe living and working environment. I mean, for me, those are sort of, you know, those 4 things that you're sort of looking for, and you know, when you look at some of those issues and take sort of those 4 pillars, if you will, and boil down, let's just take education.
Right.
You say, how does that associate with public safety and housing? And I say, well, okay, well, in this particular neighborhood, 78%, let's just take the Bester neighborhood, the Bester Elementary School District, you see that 78% of the residents in the city whose children go to Bester is rental. And of that, a good number move apartments about every 7 or 8 months. And you know, you ask yourself, how can you create stability for that child to learn, you know what I mean, if that's the environment and the mobility is occurring in some cases because of an absence of job opportunity or an absence of landlord accountability or an absence of you know, the feeling you know, of a safe atmosphere, or frankly the absence of you know, home stability. I mean, before I took a job with Middletown, you know, in '98 when I came out of college, what I did was I worked through the AmeriCorps with an at-risk youth program in Washington County. I did that for a year, and I worked with 47 families, most of which attended Williamsport or E. Russell Hicks. And I'm not, you know, I'm not afraid to associate, you know, my own upbringing. I grew up on Concord Street, which is a street removed from the West End projects. Went to Salem Avenue, which was the first Title I school in the county, and it was not, you know, it was not always the best of times. And you know, and then you sort of get out of college and you see, you know, some of the kids in the families go, you know what, for a lot of folks, it's still not the best of times, and you try and figure out, you know, how you're going to maneuver those 4 or 5 items so that they interconnect in a way that you know, creates meaningful change and meaningful opportunity. And you know, I think that for us, where the city struggles the most is its tax base. You know, out of the last 15 years, I think 12 of the years, we've had a declining assessable base, and that is a reflection of, you know, the quality of neighborhood, you know, when they come in and do the assessment. And so I think some of the things, you know, that we've put in place of, you know, identifying a theme for downtown and sort of moving forward with that theme for downtown with one of the best things we did was the First Third grant program, you know, where we've identified $1.5 million now, where we're sort of the, I'll call it the seed money investor into all types of residential and commercial reinvestment of both small and large scale property investment. Recently, and folks don't realize this, but about you know, 2012, about 1 in every 12 homes in Hagerstown was vacant, unoccupied, blighted. I have a list in here of about 800 homes that remain that way. We have a significant number of homes, I think it's about 700, where they've been on the tax, you know, the tax sale year after year after year with nothing happening. Nobody wants to live next to one of those houses. The folks that own them aren't paying the 30 or 40 or 50 grand that they rack up in fees and fines and forfeitures to government. No investors coming to buy them off the courthouse steps. And so we've worked with the county commissioners, and that gets to your later question, to say, hey, county, how about we both agree to waive our $40,000 and $50,000 worth of fines and forfeitures if this person agrees to just give us the property? Right. I mean, we've got to hit the reset button pretty hard on about 600 or 700 properties in, you know, in the city of Hagerstown, and by hitting that reset button, you know, it gives that opportunity for reinvestment through programs like the First Third, you know, where the city basically puts up the first third of the money, and then you as the investor put up the other 2/3, and you know, create or recreate or reestablish some stability of the tax base, and thereby some stability in the neighborhood, and thereby some stability of home ownership or stable rental population. I mean, you probably read in the paper, and this is the last example I'll use, of the hotel on the Dual Highway, where, you know, we finally had to shut it down. It was unsafe condition, and, you know, I don't know if folks realize this or not, but we have hundreds of folks living in hotels on average anywhere from 13 months to 36 months. Mm-hmm. So it's anywhere from like 1.5 to 3 years right now on average. And on average, these individuals pay about $1,200 to $1,600 a month to live in these hotels. And in the case of the one hotel, you know, it was in back taxes about $400,000. It was not monitoring what I'll call the health, safety, and welfare of the living arrangements, and I'm going to get a little blatant, I guess, but caseworkers that are working for organizations that are placing individuals, they're not telling on the client or telling on the landlord, i.e. the hotel, because they've got nowhere else to to place the client, and you're not getting your payment for water and sewer and electric, and government's not going to come in and take over the property because it has to assume the responsibility of those 200 occupied hotel rooms, and I think that at the end of the day, we finally sent the fire marshals in and office in and said, hey, this is unsafe. The fire, the appropriate fire systems don't work. And I think the straw that broke the back was somebody staying in one of the rooms called the front desk and said, hey, there's a fire in the heater. And the front desk said, I don't even know that that room exists in this hotel. Are you sure you're calling the right hotel? And we finally had to sort of take control of that, but you had agencies that had to scramble sort of overnight to find alternative living arrangements for individuals, that we're living in this arrangement. And I think that there's this notion that that's only happening in the city, and I can tell you from state line to state line that's happening. And so one of the thoughts with this idea of stabilizing neighborhoods is that we'll work with the school system, who can identify children who are living with parents in these temporary living arrangements. We get these properties back out of tax sale. We give them to an entity like the Housing Authority to fix them up, and then they coordinate with the homeless awareness arm of the school system to get the people out of the hotel back into these places that we then use those public funds to fix up, and create some stability both for the housing, for the neighborhood, and for the person in that temporary condition. So.
Well, and I want to drill back into that to include the downtown project, because I think that sort of ties into that. But I want to get Donnie, before we do that, I want to get Donnie out.
Yeah, no, Smithsburg is a lot different makeup as far as economics, and Kristin's right. When you break it down into pillars, if we really break it down into a micro, especially here in Smithsburg, we're 80-20 ownership to renters. So that's right off the bat, that's a completely different scenario than what the city of Hagerstown is dealing with. Now, where we're different in the bad way is city of Hagerstown has a vibrant commercial economic structure. We don't. We're 90% tax revenue based community. The vast majority of our revenues for our taxes come from taxpayers. We don't have a swath of downtown businesses that we draw in off of. So that's put us at a little bit of a disadvantage. But like he said, it's really looking at the economics of your community. It's, for us, it's the same, crime, policing, and I know that was a topic that you were going to get on, a little bit later. Code enforcement's a big thing that's come up over the years for us. That's something that we've tried to tackle a little bit, blatant and things like that.
Feel free to expand on that now if you want, because
but it all ties in, right. just as Kristin was saying about the educational factor ties into a lot of the systemic problems that we see culturally, a lot of different swaths of areas. It's the same for us. It's the economic side of it. While we do have 80-20, owners to renters, you still get to that point where some owners don't maintain their properties. They don't, they're not concerned about the aesthetics of it. And while governments don't want to get into trying to tell people how they should live, there is also a sense of communal responsibility back in and of itself. So for us, it's been, crime and policing. I just had a conversation with our chief of police, and every department's different, every community's different. I have friends that run for Hancock. They just hired a former, I believe, city police officer or a sergeant at one point in time to be their chief of police. And the conversation they had up there was, don't be too hard on the locals. I'm a little different. I'm a basketball referee, so I'm a rules guy. Okay. While I understand that we want to give warnings and things like that, at some point in time we've got to enforce the rules. And for us as an elected official, We're spending $16,000 a year on a brand new building that we just bought for our police department. So while the revenue from moving violations do not come back to the town, speed camera money does, but revenue from moving infractions do not come back to the town. As an elected official, I still have to show some sort of justification as to why we're doing, and we're seeing an increase with our new police chief of citations and warnings being written to give it that understanding that, okay, they are out here working, they are on the streets, they are trying to keep our community safe. And it's not quotas, it's not, trying to reach any kind of statistics. It's letting people know that your tax dollars are being used back to your benefit. And every year, the one thing that's impressive about Kristin, and I don't say this because he's sitting next to me, is he knows his numbers, okay? He's a numbers guy, and I try to do the same, especially when we get into budgets and we have our budget meeting and people come in and they have, they ask questions. So I went back through last year before our last budget because we had to make some systemic changes to the way that we had operated for years. And over a 10-year period from 2008 to 2018, our expenses in Smithsburg increased 60% over that course of time. Our revenues only went up 10%. So, and most of that was based off of accessible taxes because, again, we hadn't raised our property tax in 40 years. We hadn't changed our rate structure on a lot of the fees and services that we provided to residents in probably 25 years. And if anyone's owned a business or had a checkbook at home, you can't run your household or business if you're spending 6 times the amount of money you're bringing in. And unfortunately, our new mayor had to make some tough calls, and we've done that. But what it really comes down to is you've got to be able to look at your neighbor in the eye and explain to them what you're trying to accomplish, because this is more personal at this level, whether it's the city of Hagerstown, and what's the population now in the city?
42,000.
42,000. Okay. So, I've got 1,200 households in Smithsburg, which equates to about 2,900 residents in the proper. We've got 2,200 voters out of that 2,900, give or take. In our last election, we had 92 people participate in the election. Okay. So, it's a matter of, and Kristin said this earlier too, about, when you're looking for people to run, you're not necessarily looking for the color of the skin, the sex of their body. You want people that A, are educated to the issues, and if they're not, they're willing to put the time and effort in to get educated on the issues. Right. And he does an excellent job of breaking it down, boiling it down by the numbers. Just have a general sense of exactly what it is in your community that's going on. So for us, even though it's different, we all have our own problems. Our biggest thing here in Smithsburg is water and sewer infrastructure and cost, because we don't own our own water. We buy that from the city of Hagerstown. We're a wholesale customer from the city of Hagerstown. We don't own the pumping station, the wastewater treatment plant down here in Smithsburg. That's a county-run, entity now. So we're subject to the rate increases that the city passes along to us, and then we have to pass along to our constituents and consumers, in the same way with the county. And one of the things when I first ran for office in 2008, I had a lot of conversations with people in their front rooms about the cost of their water and sewer bill. And on average, we're about $325 a quarter for water and sewer in Smithsburg. I lived in Hagerstown almost all my life up until 2005. And I can tell you, living in the city of Hagerstown, it was a lot less expensive than moving out here to Smithsburg. So, while our numbers are a little different, we're one of the most affluent parts of the county. I'm not saying that a $300 water bill is easy for anyone to swallow. But the population of minorities that we have, or low-income housing that we have, or the number of seniors that we have, offset some of what I said before about the 80-20 rule as far as renters versus owners. But as an elected official, we have to look at it from the macro side of every decision that we make. How does that affect your pocketbook? What am I going to be able to say to the neighbor when I go to the PTA meeting or my son's chorus concert? I've got to be able to look at them in the eye and go, look, we're trying to do the best we can for the community. And that's why I said, for us, our pillars are tax-based. We're trying to get to an economic development standpoint to where we can attract people to want to come into Smithsburg. Crime and policing. We do have a lot of drugs in Smithsburg. Every month we've got a report of how Sims and EMS have had to respond to an OD. scene. So, we see it. We've had council members that have brought needles into meetings to express their concern of it. So we're no different, maybe not on a scale the same as some of the larger municipalities, but we see the same problems. And it all ties back into how do we, as elected officials, and hearing what our constituents want, how do we best utilize their dollars to make sure that we're making an impact every day to make sure that they know that they're living in the best community they can live.
Yeah, and you both sort of alluded, and we'll talk economy a little bit here, but you both sort of alluded about some of the issues. Crime, drugs, some homelessness, any myriad of issues. But also, I think you both sort of said the same thing that I've kind of been saying, and I believe as well, that a lot of it is driven by where your economy is. I mean, the stronger your economy, it doesn't fix those problems, but it starts to set wheels in motion to help out. And
it does. And we see the statistical numbers. I think Washington County's down around 3%, somewhere in that range of the unemployment, but we're a service industry county.
Right.
Most of the jobs that we have here, and correct me if I'm wrong, you probably have more of the data, aren't the top end paying,
right.
We're when Mac was thriving in Fairchild and Penguin, we had a different kind of clientele and job base. So it's different. And even here we see it. The vast majority of people who live in Smithsburg don't work in Washington County. They're in Montgomery, Frederick County, Baltimore, D.C. So we see it. So, yeah.
So, and that's the other thing, and this is where I was going to go with this, not to cut you off, but so Hagerstown, I know there's been a lot of effort put into the downtown area. We've talked, and that seems to be the core starting of the economic turnaround, if there's a plan for it. There's been talk of a stadium issue. I figured you'd want to talk about that. But also, I mean, tourism is big for the area. I mean, you talked about some of the orchards as well. I mean, so there are a number of diverse things that we can do. So I guess what I'd like to be able to ask you guys is, from an economical standpoint, what initiatives and what plans are there to sort of drive that? And let's weave into your interactions with the county government as well, because I want to try to get to that before we run out of time.
I think as it relates to job opportunity and primarily the service industry, we've made that transition over a number of decades. It appears, as it applies to the ebb and flow of the economies, on a larger scale, that we are more of a volume-oriented, meaning that as long as we can maintain, a volume of job availability, we seem to do better than a community that may focus on a job elevation level. In other words, I don't feel that the general approach is to attract, the highest medical industries or some of the job opportunities that, frankly speaking, being on this metro fringe,
right,
beyond Frederick, we simply can't compete on the scale that some of the more urban, more metro counties to the east of us, who are our competitors for those job opportunities, are. And so I think at times we compete more on a volume scale, and be what it may. I think that what the number is, we're within 10 hours of 50% of the U.S. population, meaning the crossroads of I-81 and I-70. You see how e-commerce has ballooned over the last 10 years, and I think that there's some reflection of that at times it is a sort of volume driven number of jobs and not
and before you go, he brings up an interesting point when he talks about how we become an e-commerce economy, and Hagerstown is on that, not Hagerstown, but the county itself. I think back to when downtown Hagerstown was where my grandparents went to shop, Sears, and all them were on the corner. That's where you went, was downtown Hagerstown. Then in '73 the mall was built, and then everything shifted there. And then we built the outlets, and then everything shifted from the mall to the outlets. Well, with the e-commerce economy, what's going to happen when the outlets start to dwindle and die, and everybody's just I can tell you right now,
It's starting already.
I spent $0 in a shopping mall
Right.
or at an outlet last year. Everything was bought from this for Christmas. So, you know, we've got to look to the 22nd century for where we're going to be as a county.
Yeah.
And I know you want to tie into that because it starts in Annapolis and it works its way back through. And we get the worst of it. And I know, you know, when and I don't want to speak for him, but when he was on the county commissioner, we struggle. We're right on the Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia line. Those states are very competitive and very aggressive with trying to get manufacturers and companies to go there. We
Yeah,
here
look
in
at Franklin
Smithsburg,
County. Look at Franklin County.
well, here in Smithsburg, we almost, our largest employer, and I don't want to mention names, but our largest employer in town signed an agreement to go into Pennsylvania, and only because they hit issues with construction, they had to augment their building. They're going to move.
Right.
It's just not on the timetable that they wanted.
Right.
And talks broke down between the county commission and this group, and they felt a little slighted and decided that Pennsylvania was more aggressive and wanted their business, and they were going to go. And I think because if we continue to have the same mindset that we've had to this point, and we don't look to adapt and adjust and be more aggressive from a state level that works its way down to a county, city, and small town level, we are going to be left behind at some point in time.
Well, and that's the thing too, because, you know, this used to be, you know, it was railroads 100 years ago. Then it became the Mack trucks, the Fairchilds.
Prison was a big thing.
Prison.
Yep.
Now, a lot of that has dwindled. So we don't really have, I don't think, as a county, there's not necessarily a clear, and I think this is sort of what you're talking about, there's no clear identity to say, yeah, we're a textile county.
Right.
Or anything. So I guess is what you're telling me, the answer is to try to be, you used the term volume, but is a path forward volume / diversity of volume? So, you know, it's healthcare, but then it's also small, medium, and large businesses. It's trying to really reach out to them. Is it kind of like that?
I guess for me, I look at it in terms of volume and nodes, and I'll put it this way: we obviously, the county exerts a measurable amount of effort on development of the airport.
Correct.
Okay?
Correct.
And people probably don't realize it, but there at any one given time, there's anywhere from 15 to 1,800 workers out at the airport on a daily basis. Okay, but you don't really see that. Right. And they're not spending sort of millions on exercising. What I want to say. Focused growth on that, right, any more than when you look over at the Hopewell Valley area and you say, okay, you know what? And I know you asked about Fort Richard. That's probably a tangential sort of example. But you look at the Hopewell Valley corridor and you look at the opportunity that popped up has arisen there, and now with the North Point that was just announced this past week, being commensurate with that sort of I-81 transport corridor, and then you take Meredith Medical Center, right, and then the hospital, right, and now the Mount Etna, where I have belief that we will continue to have developed and have an evolution of medical job opportunity in that sort of, I'll call it the East End, HCC area. And so when I say volume, what I'm saying is I don't see that we go out and sort of purposefully and singularly focus and say we're going to be this metric. You know what I mean? This is, there was a time of day when we sort of lived and died by being Fairchild. And being,
well, you're right.
And so now I think that we need to continue to produce a volume-driven job opportunity economy here so that you can stay at 3 or 4%. Because if you're banking long term on a single employer being sort of that crux of what makes or breaks you, or that one type that makes or breaks you, the economy is way too global at this point to be able to. And
Kristin brings up a great point with healthcare. We see the explosion in healthcare, and we've kind of jumped onto that bandwagon.
Right.
And he's absolutely right. If we focus and narrow it down to a select small section, we're going to be behind the curve when the curve finally turns. And that goes to, and I know you continue to want to, we're going to get into the county commission. And
actually, go ahead now,
like
because I'm going to have to wrap soon. So
no, I just think that from, and look, I don't want to turn this into a bashment of the 5 elected county commissioners.
No, if you want to.
But I do have reservations that notwithstanding the gentleman sitting to my left, but the makeup of the county commissions over the last few years, I don't think have been forward vision thinking. I think it's been this is the way it is. We come to the meetings, we kind of just do our thing. Staff tells us what we need to do. We kind of do it. And there's no real long-term, my term on council has always been, and I'm a process procedures guy, is what happens when I'm not here and this council's not here and this mayor, what happens 3 iterations from now?
Right.
And I just don't get the sense, and maybe this has changed now that courts come on, and Randy, there's a different perspective, maybe more so with court, but I just don't get the sense that there's this long-term strategy, vision. I'll take something as simple as the fire tax. It was a struggle just to get a 0.2% increase of revenue. And I'm pretty sure if you ask my constituents here, we would pay a little more in taxes if we knew we could somewhat fund a more functional county system.
Because that's tangible.
Right, it's a tangible expense.
Right.
And now, no, we all know serving in government, it doesn't work that way. We've had governors that have run and said, we're going to do this and we're going to put it in a piggy bank and it's only going to be for this. And then the first time that the revenues fall off, we dip into the education, piggy bank to pay for something else.
Right.
And I understand that residents here, you're going to raise my taxes, you're going to put it in a tax fund, and it's only going to be for fire until a deficit hits and then we're going to take it.
Sure.
But I think that being a tangible thing that I think we could all wrap around, and us as a volunteer fire company and an EMS department that just went through a shakeup, I think that's what my constituents want.
Do you guys feel like, you mentioned, and I want to leave time for questions, but do you feel like the county commissioners, historically or currently, do you feel like it's a good working relationship?
No. Look at the headlines over the last couple of years.
Between your municipality and
okay,
them. Not internally with them.
Okay, so for the longest time, Smithsburg was very autonomous. We never really approached the county about things. To our detriment, probably, we tried to do things in-house. Doesn't mean that we didn't ask for things from here. Look, we all know about the forgiveness that was done for the town of Williamsport, and that kerfuffled some feathers. But that was because we in Smithsburg were fighting to get an expansion project done over at the wastewater treatment plant that we felt that would have been able to sustain growth, not just in Smithsburg, but part of the eastern part of the city and county. Now, I also understand that the county and city weren't really talking about some of the customers they may lose on that end. But for us, I was more flabbergasted that the county commissioners would come to Smithsburg not prepared to address that concern. And when I, confronted 2 of them, and they didn't have the requisite information they didn't know what I was talking about, even though staff had given them a report saying that, we're not going to do the improvements to the Smithsburg wastewater plant. I was more concerned about that, and that created a little bit of a chasm. Now, our mayor has recently worked to try to rebuild that relationship with the county, and we subsequently have partnered with them on a few things that we're trying to get done. But we understand that we're just a small blip in a big pie for them.
Sure.
And we, like I said, we try to be autonomous over here, and we try to govern the best we can. But I do think that over the course of the last few years, that relationship has soured, and the new mayor is working to at least repair some of that.
Well, I don't know what point in time I'm allotted to measure that, but I can say that when I stopped being a city council member and became a county commissioner, it was interesting. It was an interesting dynamic because we had a 2+2 committee at the time, where 2 county officials and 2 city officials met weekly, and the notion was...
And I think they've started that again. from what I understand.
We don't have that.
Okay.
So the notion was if you get two from both sides to agree, you could get a third from each side. And a good example of successes of that are the expansions that were done at Edgewood and Edgewood Drive and Robinwood right there, because we worked out a formula and Dory Nips and Kirchville were the county side at the time. Anyway, when I became county commissioner, neither side wanted me on the 2+2 committee any longer. You know what I mean? Because the city officials were like, wait a second, he's over at the county, giving the trade secrets, and the county officials like, that dude's from the city, he's just gonna lobby for the city. And so the 2+2 disbanded. And that's
you killed it. Way to go.
That's as simple as that can get. But when you become a county commissioner, part of the difficulty is, one, you're working under a commission form of government,
right,
which to me, and I know that the charter form has come up, I will tell you that in my opinion, my personal opinion in working of both, that a charter form of government is clearly a better framework of government to work from. It's just my personal opinion. I would never impress that upon a voter to make a decision, for themselves or what they believe based on my opinion of that. And I always found it funny in the last go-around of the charter form of government that they brought in the forum that they had out at HCC. I remember very distinctly, they brought in 6 folks in local government to argue the pros and cons of it, except for guys like John Schnebley and myself and Rick Weldon and John Donnie that have seen both sides, various sides of that structure. It's so I think that it takes some of that experience. And the second issue you have is you immediately develop multiple personalities.
Right.
You just do because, again, you go to the different towns and the different towns feel that you're sort of, more favorable to the other towns, that you may live near or come from, and the folks outside of the towns, feel that you should represent them more squarely.
Everybody feels like they're
than the folks
right
in town, right, because you're a county commissioner, and it's hard to get folks outside of towns to accept that they're the same resident, that they're all in one county, that there aren't town residents and county residents, and you should represent the county residents more than you do the town. So I think that you struggle with that. And then when you have those multiple personalities, when you work under a framework of government that you don't have as expansive autonomy to do what you want legislatively, then I think that you do struggle a bit in that relationship with your municipalities because, great example, right here in this town, one of the things that I proposed back in 2009, I said, look, the city of Hagerstown does great on its fees for trash collection because we're able to go out and get a single hauler and guarantee them a significant customer base, right, for a set period. At that time, we had 26 haulers in Washington County that are registered to dump at the county landfill, okay? 16 of those were considered small haulers, and 9 or 10, whatever that number left is, were considered large haulers. And I said, wouldn't it be great as a county commissioners, if we could carve the county up into defined districts, just like we do fire service, and say, we're going to bid these areas out. Because the economies of scale in a community like Smithsburg, if you were combined with Cave Town, right, and some of the outlying suburban surroundings, no different than Williamsport and its surrounding suburbans, you could accomplish economies of scale. And it's like, wait a second, you can't do that. You're infringing on the guy's right that, and so you see in some of the neighborhoods, they've got 12 different haulers
and we've always done
coming in to pick, and they're all paying it different. And so that's what I mean is you sort of have some of these ideas, but it almost pits one against the other. And I'll just use the Smithsburg example why I don't feel that there's always been that bad of a relationship. When I came to Smithsburg and when I went to all the towns on that regular rolling basis, I would say very clearly, I'm here at your disposal. I'll be back 4 months from now. What do you want me to get done? Right. And Smithsburg very clearly over and over said, we want you to fix the school entrance.
at the high school.
Yeah, they got them.
We want you to fix that. So eventually I brought Joe Crobeth in, and Joe Crobeth met with Mayor Meyers, and they figured it out. And I said, look, you guys figure it out. You told me what your thing is. I got you the people to do it. I go to Sharpsburg, and Sharpsburg said, we want you to plow the snow on our streets and fix the runoff from your county road that's coming in our town. So you know what I mean? Right. I think that you sort of got to pull back from those big items, because I could sit here and you know, and go on for some time about the difficulties I have with the county right now with fire service between city paid and county volunteer. Right. But those are things that take time to figure out. I think the best thing to maintain that good relationship is try and pick the sort of smaller, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
More immediate things that you can agree on and say, okay, you know, what can we get?
Well, the worst thing for us was it was in the middle of a political year. So, you know, you have all this hit. And then there was some shenanigans and some backdealing when we were going through our annexation fight that even the developer is still battling through some of that. And you know, our concern was, you know, if you make this more difficult for our developer to develop and annex in, and you get in the middle of our annexation fight over here, you got a potential of killing our growth, and we've already told you that we're dying on a vine over here.
Sure.
And that's why I said, you know, I think he's right. You know, he is one of the few county commissioners that came when he was on the county commission that would actually come into the municipalities and ask us those very questions. And that has died off. I mean, that's something that we see them at election time, right. Or we see them when it's, you know, the evening council, you know, county commissioner meeting when they rotate them around.
In Frederick County, they've actually they've signed for a number of years now. It's called the County Liaison to Municipalities. Roger Wilson was the most recent, and it was amazing. I mean, it was an amazing transition to be able to contact that direct county staffer that said, "This is my primary responsibility, is to facilitate coordination of opportunities between you municipality and your county government that you have you know, concerns on or that you need assistance with." And that relationship has worked wonderfully.
We're about out of time, but does anybody in the audience have anything that they wanted to add or ask or anything like that before we close out?
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And your dedication and your energy, and you know, it's quite something that you've put so much time and effort into good governance.
Thank you.
And then I like to travel a lot, and part of the reason I like to travel to other countries is to learn what they do. And I had the experience of a couple years ago going to Norway and Lillehammer, and the person that I was staying with was talking about their recycling program. And I said, oh, well, I want to go see what you do.
Okay.
And so I went, and it's I don't know what they call it, not county, but, you know, it's a big district with small municipalities. Well, each municipality is responsible for one form of the recycling. They have a plant in each municipality. Well, that creates jobs. With e-commerce, we still have waste, and it just seemed like a wonderful plan. And the restaurants take all of their food there, it goes into biofuel, and all of the government vehicles are run by that fuel.
So for here in Smithsburg, one of the you know, when you do this and you get to your end, and, you know, somebody asks you, you know, what's one of your biggest accomplishments? And for here, it was working with Jerome Martin to get a curbside recycling program done. Jerome was an advocate, passionate about curbside recycling. We had an administration that didn't want to go that direction. You know, you fight the connotation of, well, I'm getting my trash reduced to one night versus two. And it's like, no, if you recycle, you still have 2 nights of trash. We were actually to lower our cost in the first year by $35,000, you know, by going to a recycling program, because at the time the vendor, Kristin talked about, you know, consolidating under one vendor, was able to lease us the bins for like 50 cents a month. So it was tied into your monthly number. So we were able to get that program started. And I remember sitting with the county representatives and Roddy Tissue at the city talking about how we do things here. And because my mom still lives in Hagerstown. So, you know, I still try to keep an eye on and listen to some of the stuff that goes on there. And she's an avid voter. I make her go vote every year in the city election. So I'm just telling you.
But I'm saying that there are innovative programs
There are.
that create jobs, that keep the you know, it doesn't go out of the county, and that it doesn't go out of the county. I mean, there's and that the innovation,
I saw
I
something.
think, and the creativity is what brings people here and would bring people here and on board, and particularly young people, like you were saying. You know, young people move away because I don't think that creative, innovative energy is happening. And I mean, you know, there are other examples. I mean, I also just went to Belize, and I took the People's Bus. You know, it's an old rickety bus that stopped every 3 minutes,
Right.
for anybody who was on the side of the road, or let anybody off. But those people got to work. That was public transportation.
Right.
And we don't have that. Now that's a poor country, and they offer that. And not only that, the bus had a conductor that helped the people get off and on, help with their baggage, help with children.
Well, and that's why I said earlier that's one of my concerns with the makeup. And I agree. Look, I didn't agree with Leroy Meyers a lot politically when he was on the county commission, but he did state that if anyone supported charter home rule, you know, he'd advocate with them. And I agree with Chris. I think it is a very archaic system to have to take your elected officials to run down to Annapolis to get people that have no clue as to what's going on back in Washington County to parlay into a vote for us to get the funding and the necessary resources we need. On the flip side, I also see the concern of we keep electing the same head in the sand mentality. And I thought that was going to change in this last election, and it didn't. We ended up putting virtually the same people back in the county commission position. So there's a scary thing that in politics, you know, we're responsible for, you know, the electorate and getting the electorate involved and charged and want to vote. So to your point, I agree. I saw a thing. I used to work in protection, personal protection, and I was actually at a company and watched a video in Scandinavia or something. They take rubber and plastic bottles and turn it back into asphalt that they use on their roads versus what we use here. It's more environmentally, you know, safe. It lasts as long, if not longer, than concrete and asphalt. So that's a mindset change at the very top. And we see that with Medicare for all versus, you know, nothing or staying the status quo. And when Kristin talked about, you know, the healthcare industry, in 20 years, if we change the model of how our healthcare is in this country, that again could change how Washington County is affected, because if there aren't all these hospitals and nursing and facilities being built that are being built now, so it does have a ripple down effect. But it goes back to my original point. I'm just not sure that withstanding, like I said, the gentleman to my left, sitting to my left, that we're electing people that can think outside the box for a longer term than the next election. And I think that's what we're stuck in right now.
Well, I think, I appreciate everybody's time. I think we're out of time, actually. I appreciate both you gentlemen coming. Sorry we didn't have a bigger crowd here tonight. We're experimenting with trying other locations outside of just Hagerstown. So it's still trial and error on our part. I want to thank you both. If there's anything that, you know, we can ever do for you guys, please let us know. And then I think there's some food back there. Yeah. There's some very stale Girl Scout cookies and probably some cold pizza. So
no, I think you guys just being involved in social media, it doesn't matter the size of your crowd, you're going to get enough eyeballs watching it. So continue to do what you're doing. Okay, well, thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming out. Really appreciate it.